You're thinking right now. You experience yourself as the one doing it, the thinker, in charge, generating thoughts, directing attention. The thought is yours. You produced it. But here's what I want you to try. Watch the next thought that arises. Don't try to have a thought, just wait. And watch what appears. Did you choose it? Or did it arrive and then you claimed it? This is not a rhetorical trick. This is the question that a significant body of careful neuroscience is pressing toward. And the answer has implications that cut through almost every assumption about mind, agency, and selfhood that you carry. There is serious evidence that the experience of being the author of your thoughts, the sense of generating them, choosing them, directing them, is constructed after the fact. The thought arises from the neural dynamics. The authorship is the story. Where does a thought actually come from? Let's follow that carefully. Before asking where a thought comes from, you need to know what it physically is. It's not a thing, not a packet of information stored somewhere specific, not a file retrieved from a location. A thought is a process, a pattern of electrical activity distributed across a large number of brain regions simultaneously. The content of the thought is encoded in the pattern, not in any single neuron, in the relationship between millions of them. The basic unit: a neuron receives inputs from other neurons through synaptic connections, some excitatory, some inhibitory. It integrates all of these inputs. If the total excitatory input crosses a threshold, the neuron fires, generates an action potential, a brief electrical spike that travels along its axon and releases neurotransmitters at thousands of synaptic connections with other neurons. Those neurons integrate their inputs. Some fire, some don't. The cascade propagates. A thought, even something simple, even the word you just read, involves coordinated activity across billions of neurons. The pattern of which neurons fire, in what sequence, with what timing relative to one another, carries the information. Change the pattern, you change the thought. Disrupt the timing, you disrupt cognition. The thought is the pattern. This means that asking where a thought comes from is asking why a specific pattern of activity arises across a network of 86 billion neurons at a given moment. And that question has a physical answer, increasingly detailed, increasingly precise, and a deeper question underneath it that the physical answer hasn't touched. The patterns your brain generates are not random. They're constrained by the physical structure of the synaptic connections, and that structure was built by your history. Synaptic weight is the strength of the connection between two neurons. How strongly one neuron's firing influences the firing of another. Weights are not fixed, they change with experience. The principle, first proposed by Donald Hebb in 1949, is neurons that fire together wire together. When two neurons are repeatedly active at the same time, the synapse between them strengthens. When they're repeatedly active out of sync, it weakens. This is how memory works. This is how learning works. And this is how the character of your thinking works. The thoughts you think frequently, the mental paths you return to repeatedly, become physically easier to traverse. The synaptic pathway for them is strengthened. The pattern of activity can be initiated more easily, maintained more stably, completed more reliably. Your thought patterns are encoded in the physical weights of your synapses. The things you've experienced, the thoughts you've practiced, the associations you've formed, all of it is represented as the relative strength of trillions of synaptic connections. You don't think from a blank slate. You think from an architecture that your entire history has sculpted. The thought you're most likely to have next is not arbitrary. It's the thought toward which the current dynamics of your neural network, shaped by everything that has ever happened to you, is being pushed. The brain is never quiet. Even with no external input, no sensory stimulation, no task, no conversation, large networks of brain regions remain highly active, consuming significant metabolic energy. This is not neural noise waiting to be useful. It's organized activity with structure and function. The default mode network is the set of regions that are most active during rest, when you're not focused on an external task. It includes the medial prefrontal cortex, the posterior cingulate cortex, the hippocampus, the angular gyrus, and other regions. It's the network active during self-referential thought, autobiographical memory, imagining the future, social reasoning, and mind wandering. When your mind drifts, when you're in a meeting but your thoughts have gone somewhere else, when a memory surfaces unexpectedly, when you find yourself imagining something without choosing to, the default mode network is running that process. These are the apparently spontaneous thoughts, the ones that seem to arise from nowhere. But they don't arise from nowhere. The DMN is operating on the current state of your synaptic weights, your entire learned history. It's operating on residual activations from recent processing. What you were just thinking about continues to influence what arises next. It's operating on your neurochemical state, the current levels of dopamine, serotonin, and other modulators. And it's operating on neural noise, intrinsic variability that exists at every level of the nervous system, down to quantum fluctuations in individual ion channels. A spontaneous thought is not random and not chosen. It's the output of a complex, nonlinear dynamical system operating on a rich set of inputs, most of which are below conscious awareness. The apparent spontaneity is real. You didn't consciously generate it. The causation is also real. It didn't come from nowhere. It came from the current physical state of your brain. And part of that physical state is thermal and quantum noise in your ion channels. The specific thought you have at a specific moment, whether an idea arises now or 30 seconds from now, may be partly determined by molecular scale physics operating in individual cells. Small fluctuations propagate. Noise at the microscopic scale can tip the dynamics toward one attractor rather than another. The particular thought that arrives this moment traces its specific timing partly to physics that has nothing to do with you at the cognitive level. In the 1980s, neuroscientist Benjamin Libet ran a series of experiments that generated a controversy that has not fully resolved. Participants were asked to flex their wrist whenever they felt like it, no instruction about timing, just whenever the urge arose. They watched a clock and noted where the hand was when they first became aware of the intention to move. Libet simultaneously recorded EEG activity from the scalp, particularly over the motor cortex. He found a signal in the EEG, a slow, gradual build-up of electrical activity he called the readiness potential, that began approximately 550 milliseconds before the movement. Participants reported becoming consciously aware of the intention to move approximately 200 milliseconds before movement. The neural preparation began roughly 350 milliseconds before conscious awareness of the intention. The implication that many drew, the brain initiates the movement before the person is consciously aware of deciding to move. The conscious experience of willing the action is generated after the neural process has already begun. Free will, in the naive sense of conscious decisions causing actions, looks shaky. The debate is real and ongoing. Critics have pointed out that the readiness potential may not represent a decision. It may reflect the brain's preparation for a possible movement that has not yet been committed to. It appears before many spontaneous movements, including ones the person ultimately doesn't make. The retrospective clock reading method introduces timing uncertainty. What exactly counts as conscious intention is not agreed upon. What the experiments do clearly establish, even in the more careful interpretation, is that something is happening in the brain before you experience deciding. The neural landscape is being shaped before the subjective experience of intending arises. Whether this undermines agency in any important sense is contested. What it confirms is that the naive picture, conscious intention causes neural activity, is not the complete story. The relationship between neural events and the experience of intentionality is more complicated, and the timing doesn't favor the naive picture. The most rigorous current framework for understanding where thoughts come from is dynamical systems theory applied to neural networks. It's worth spending time here because it changes how you think about thought. At any moment, the brain is in some state, some pattern of activity across its billions of neurons. Think of this as a point in a very high-dimensional space, where each dimension corresponds to the activity level of one neuron. The brain's dynamics move this point through that space over time. That space has structure. It has regions that the dynamics naturally flow toward, attractors. An attractor is a state or a set of states that the dynamics tend toward from nearby starting points. Once in an attractor, the system stays there for some time before perturbation or natural dynamics move it elsewhere. A thought is an attractor, a pattern of neural activity that is self-sustaining, that the network's current dynamics reinforce and maintain, for long enough to be experienced as a thought. Memory is the formation of new attractors through Hebbian learning, synaptic strengthening that creates a stable basin in the state space. Recall is the dynamics finding an attractor from a partial cue. A partial match to the attractor state is enough to pull the full pattern into activation. This is why a smell can retrieve a detailed memory. The smell activates a partial pattern that the dynamics complete. Mind-wandering is the brain's dynamics moving through the attractor landscape without external anchoring, driven by internal noise and the natural flow of the system between nearby attractor basins. A thought arising is the dynamics settling into a new basin. The feeling of a thought arriving from nowhere is the experience of an attractor capture, the dynamics suddenly finding a stable state. This framework is mathematically precise, makes testable predictions about neural activity, and matches a large body of experimental data. And it has a direct philosophical implication. If thoughts are attractors, and attractors are determined by the synaptic weight structure of the network, and that structure was shaped entirely by prior experience and genetic architecture, then where a thought comes from is from the entire prior causal history of the physical system that is your brain, which is to say, from everything that ever happened to it, plus the noise. And the neurochemical state isn't a background detail. It's the medium in which everything else happens. Dopamine modulates the signal-to-noise ratio of responses in the prefrontal cortex, the region most associated with goal-directed, controlled thinking. When dopamine is well tuned, the system responds sharply to relevant signals and ignores irrelevant ones. The attractor landscape sharpens around goal-relevant states. Too little dopamine, the landscape flattens, distractibility increases, thought becomes unfocused. Too much, rigidity, perseveration, a narrowing of accessible thought. Serotonin modulates the balance between internally generated and externally driven processing. Lower serotonin states are associated with ruminative thought, the dynamics returning repeatedly to negatively valenced attractors. The person isn't choosing to ruminate, the neurochemistry is biasing the attractor landscape toward those states. Norepinephrine drives arousal and sensitivity to salient stimuli. Under stress, high norepinephrine, the system becomes hyper-responsive to threat-relevant inputs, and the range of accessible thought patterns narrows. You can't think broadly when the system is optimized for immediate threat response. Acetylcholine promotes neural plasticity, increasing the system's sensitivity to new inputs, making it more likely to update its attractor structure in response to experience. High acetylcholine states are associated with learning-ready, attentive processing. When you describe your mood as affecting your thinking, you're describing this. Neurochemistry is not a separate layer on top of thinking. It's the chemical medium that determines what thinking can occur. The thoughts that feel available to you, the patterns you find yourself returning to, the associations that naturally arise, these are all physically constrained by molecules binding to receptors, modulating ion channel kinetics, changing the effective dynamics of the entire network. You are not separate from your neurochemistry. Your thinking is your neurochemistry in motion. All of that, synaptic weights, default mode dynamics, neural noise, attractors, neurochemical states, is a real, detailed, physically grounded account of where thoughts come from. It's genuinely impressive. It's a far more accurate picture than anything available 50 years ago. And there's something it doesn't touch. It doesn't explain why the thought is accompanied by experience, why there is something it is like to think. Why, when the attractor state arises and the distributed pattern of neural firing settles, there is a perspective from which it is encountered. Why you are in there, experiencing the thought, rather than the brain simply processing information the way a thermostat processes temperature, accurately, responsively, and without anyone home to feel it. The thought you're having right now, the physical account, tells you why this specific pattern is arising in your specific brain at this specific moment, the result of your history, your current state, your neurochemistry, the noise in your ion channels. All of that is real. All of it is physical. All of it is, in principle, traceable in the equations. None of it explains the first-person quality, the insideness, the fact that there is something it is like to be you, thinking this thought right now. Dirac followed equations to places that were genuinely strange, to antimatter, to quantum field theory, to predictions that seemed impossible until they were confirmed. He found repeatedly that mathematical precision could take you further than intuition, but that the strangeness of the end was real and had to be accepted, not explained away. The neuroscience of thought is in that position. The description is increasingly precise, and at the end of the description there is still the same strangeness, a physical system obeying physical laws, somehow producing a point of view, producing the experience of being a mind from the inside. Where does a thought come from? From the physics of your brain? 86 billion neurons, 100 trillion synapses, a synaptic weight structure encoding your entire history, operating in a neurochemical medium, driven partly by molecular noise, settling into attractor states in a space of almost inconceivable dimensionality, and from wherever it is that experience comes from, which is the question we haven't answered, which may be the question we can't answer from inside the very system we are trying to understand. You're thinking right now. You know that, not by measuring it, but by being it. That difference between being a physical system and knowing you're a physical system from the inside is what the physics hasn't explained. And it's the most important question the physics leaves open.